Hey, how in the world are you? I am ready for another podcast talking about what goes on behind the music. Stand by.
Welcome to Kilroy's Outlaws and Legends Behind the Music with your host, multi-award-winning music producer, Eddie Kilroy. And now, here's your host, Eddie Kilroy.
We're going to talk about something that's very special that kind of took the world by storm, and it was XM satellite radio. Yep, that was many, many years ago, or actually crowding a couple of decades. We had a big time there. I was one of the first hires there, and I'll get into that in a minute. But immediately, the truck drivers around the United States latched on to XM satellite radio because it was a godsend for them. They could drive all the way across the country, never change a channel, never lose the signal, and they just loved it. I think probably I went there and I think we started with maybe 300,000 subscribers, and it grew from there. But what I want to talk about XM is the facility there, and the people there were absolutely incredible. Went on the air back in 1921. I think it was October, something like that, to launch the first satellite. I went there in May of 21. Yes, about 6 months or so before, 6 or 7 months before our first satellite was launched. Other program directors came in. I was program director of Channel 13, which was called Hank's Place, and it was traditional country and the ambiance and the general feel of a Texas honky-tonk. For those of you that aren't familiar with Channel 13, Hank's Place, it sounded like you had just walked into a Texas honky-tonk with the crowd ambiance, the people talking, the glasses tinkling, and so forth and so on. And, of course, we had recorded in what we call a hot shot box, sounds of beer pouring, Coca-Cola pouring, coffee. Drop a nickel in the jukebox. I had a nickel there. I had a big gun. It was a .44 Magnum, and this was right after 9/11. So I executed on air terrorist, and I had a gun and a sound that boom, that gun would go off and we'd kill a terrorist. And early on, I curtailed it somewhat because I got some feedback when I told them we were cutting the heads off the terrorists, hanging them on the front porch of a feed store down in Texas, actually right out of Houston, which we really didn't do it, but people thought we did it. And I kind of curtailed the executions for a while and went on back to just saying what son of a guns the terrorists were. 9/11 happened when I was on the air. And as the crow flies from where XM Studios were on Eckington Place in Washington, D.C., we were probably about a mile and a quarter from the Pentagon when the plane went in there. So there was quite a lot of activity all over the country, of course, but especially right there. There was a program director of, I don't know whether he was a program director or whether he was just a spot guy, but he had, if you're on 95 in D.C. and the Pentagon's over there, right across the street were some apartments. And he was sitting on the balcony having a cup of coffee and watched the plane hit the Pentagon. That'd be a memory that stay with you a long time. But XM was a special place. I'm trying to put all this into context and as to what we did and how we did it. I said I was up there early. A lot of people came in right after me to do the architecture on their channels, meaning the production, the liners, the whole deal. I went up there in May of 2021, and I think we launched in October. We did the first satellite. Speaking of that, I'm just going into some detail because so many people didn't realize exactly what XM satellite was all about. It was very, very not convoluted, but a lot of people were involved in that. The two programming heads were Lee Abrams and Dave Logan, both very experienced guys, both knew radio. And Lee Abrams was kind of like a mad scientist. Every time I'd have a meeting with him, he'd say, just go on there and do what you want, say what you want, whatever you want to do. If it works, you're a hero. If it doesn't work, forget it, go on to something else. heck of a guy to work for, and we had a great relationship. Dave Logan, extremely bright guy, and the talent within XM, that was the biggest pool of talent that I'd ever been into. But I didn't tell you how I got to XM or why I got to XM, so I'm going to turn back just a little bit. I was a successful, I guess would be the word. I accomplished more than I ever thought I would as a record producer in Nashville. But the music had changed. It was no longer the country that I was used to. And I said, I don't know what to record. And Bruce Hinton, who was a friend of mine and also was my West Coast promotion man when I was president of Playboy Records, which incidentally where Mickey Gilley was launched into a long string of #1 records. But I had no idea what to do in the studio because it had changed so much. And I called Bruce Hinton, and I said, Bruce, I think I'm going to move to my little place down in Bandera, Texas. I had a little place there, and I was roping a lot. And I had a rope horse called Hank, and he was really doing really good. And I said, you know what? I'm going to just check the music industry to it and go down to Bandera and rope. And if somebody wants me to produce a record, I will. If not, that's okay. Me and old Hank are doing pretty good roping and picking up a check pretty regularly. Well, I called Bruce Hinton and at MCA, a dear friend. I said, hey, Bruce, I'm moving to Texas, and I'm going to rope and just make a living roping. And I just don't know what to record if I go to the studio now. And he laughed and said, nobody else knows right now what to do. He said, but don't go to Texas. Somebody in Washington, D.C. needs you badly. And GW was, Bush was president then, and I was pretty darn sure that he was not needing me up there. And I said, well, what's the deal? He said, there's going to be something coming out nobody knows about called XM satellite radio. And obviously I hadn't heard of it either. And he said, they don't have anyone that has the depth of knowledge of country music as you do, and they really need you up there. Would you consider it? And I said, well, yeah. I'm going to miss roping a lot, but they sent me a ticket, and I'll go in there. And I'm a little bit jaded, actually very jaded, because I had the opportunity to record records in most all the centers in Europe, and especially around London. I did a lot of records there, and in all the major centers here in the United States. So I kind of thought, yeah, they're going to show me a trick. I've seen the best studios, worked in the best studios almost in the world. Well, I walked into there and I was absolutely stunned. 82 digital studios under one roof. It was incredible. I said 82, and it just went on and went on and went on. And the building, another interesting fact I think is they had to find a building big enough or strong enough to hold all of the equipment. I mean, you're putting 82 digital studios up, but you got to carry some weight. They bought the building where the original National Geographic was printed, which they had those huge presses in those days, so the weight factor was not involved. So they bought the building, and I saw the pictures in the lobby of the guys making National Geographic magazine. Nevertheless, I was and I met with the guys, Dave Logan, and Lee Abrams, and they offered me one of those deals that you couldn't turn down. Never in my wildest dreams would this cowboy ever think I would live in Washington, D.C. But we did. We didn't live in Washington, D.C., but I took the job there. We had to live out in Virginia, about 50 miles, in order to have our horses. And we did not have a big place out of Virginia because the land in northern Virginia close to Washington is $100,000 an acre. So we didn't have a very big place up there, but we made do. Getting back to XM satellite radio, we had more people listening, and it was incredible. I would, in a 4-hour on-air shift, I would literally talk to, I promise you I'm telling you the truth. We had a bank of 800 lines coming in. I would talk to 150 to 200 people in a 4-hour show. I mean, it's real quick, and we mentioned their names and kind of personalized it, and they just absolutely lived with XM. And we were rocking along doing great things. One thing that always amazed me was a guy by the name of Bob Wormington. He was the launch guy for Apollo 12, and they hired him to launch the satellites. And I had lunch with him one day. Lunch probably ran about an hour, hour and a half. I'm yet to understand what that guy was talking about. That's how bright he was. I was telling a friend of mine that the spot where the first satellite had to be, way up there, way up there, and there was a 300-mile radius, and he had to hit the middle or be within that 300-mile radius, and he put that satellite 3 feet from where it was supposed to be, and I went, my God, I can't shoot a rifle that good. He puts that thing way up there in space. Good golly, Miss Molly. He was a nice guy, but he was so into a conversation that I did not understand at all, because he's telling me about Apollo 12, and I knew the name. That's all I knew, but a very nice guy. Another thing I was telling my friend about is where the satellites were launched. I don't know if you know the name Ted Turner or not. I personally don't like Ted Turner because he's like way left. And on top of that, he married that communist Jane Fonda. Oh, God, why would he do that? I guess because their personalities matched or something. But he was smart enough to buy all of the oil drilling platforms that were abandoned on the equator, which is where you launch satellites from if you want to be accurate in the placement. So they were launched there off the in the equator, right there in that same spot. But Bob was a good guy. But the programming, I want to get back to it. If you guys out there, and so many of you that are listening to this podcast today had XM satellite radio, and you know that you could go from one end of this country to the other and never lose a signal. You've got a choice of any type of music you want. You remember the 50s on 5? It sounded just like you were living in the 1950s. 60s on 6, same thing. 70s on 70s. Then we had Fox News. And I'm proudly talking about Hank's Place. Hank's Place was out of 68 music channels, was the #1 music channel. It was because we were playing music that people loved, but they couldn't get it anywhere. And especially the truck drivers and what have you, they loved country music, and we played country. The great ones, Ray Price, Willie Nelson, Johnny Bush, all those great singers from that time. And we just kind of rocked on, and all of a sudden it's catching on. And we went from 300,000 subscribers to 5 million in just a period of maybe about 2 or 3 years, about 3 years. And then when I left there, we were around 9 million listeners. And I had the #1 channel on XM radio called Hank's Place. And it was amazing how many listeners would call in, how many people were listening. And all of a sudden I'm getting speaking engagements. And I'm saying, what am I going to talk about? I remember a trucking company that hauled cattle out of Topeka, Kansas. And they hired me to do an after-dinner speech at their banquet. And all of them were just, all I could say was XM radio, XM radio. And they absolutely loved it. The talent there was something else. The power was there. I opened up the room one day where the computers were. Now, there, as far as you can see, there was a bank of computers. 22 terabytes. I think, you can check me on this, I think it was larger than the IRS bank of 22 terabytes. That's a lot. But it was answering, I won't lie to you, I think it was answering 128 commands a second. Because remember, it's programming all of those channels, not just the music channels, but it's the NASCAR and the talk channels, Fox News. They all these channels and the music channels, they was having to feed those, and it was huge. The IT guys were the most incredible I'd ever seen. I mean, you have a problem, pick up the phone, boom. They had about a dozen, because it was 24 hours a day. And they would split up. But it was a lot of good things going on, and I made a lot of friends there. And they were a lot of time to get your channel together. What I didn't understand is before I got there, they had already gone out and they had like family, artist family deals. You know, they wanted Willie and they wanted this and that. And they gave, the name of my channel was Hank's Place. Now, they had all the channel assignment names and so forth, but this was Hank's Place because they were city people and they didn't quite understand anything about country except Hank Williams. But never, never, never was Williams mentioned. It was Hank's Place. They gave Hank Jr. $1 million to use the name Hank. I said, oh, God. There's so many Hanks out there. They gave Hank Snow, Hank Lachlan, my horse was named Hank. Never Williams was mentioned. So they gave him $1 million, and he said, he kind of smiled and said, sure, you can call it Hank if you want to. I eventually changed the name to Willie's Place from Hank's Place, and there's another story there. But it was quite an experience for a cowboy from Liberty, Texas, going to Washington, D.C., and being one of the people to kick off XM satellite radio wonderfully. And I was there, as I mentioned, about 4 or 5 months, I think about 5 months, before we ever launched the satellite thing, got on the air. And as I'm talking about on the air and that sort of thing, I want to talk about a sponsor. You know what I'm going to talk about. I'm going to talk about Total Feeds because they have such great product. You know, our horses are on Total Equine. That's great. We've been on it. I met Dr. Harry Anderson 16, 17 years ago when we first bought the ranch in Texas, and we went on Total Equine. Well, our horses just did wonderful. Everybody started feeding Total Equine, but then Dr. Anderson came up with a formula for Total People, and it was wonderful, and it worked. And then Total Bovine, and a lot of the bulls, I mentioned it many times, that you see on the PBR or the Pro Rodeo National Finals, those bulls are on Total Bull, and they have developed a lot of muscle there. There's so much to go on with Total Feed, Total People, Total Bull, Total Canine, which are two dogs are being raised on Total Canine. So go to the website and go to totalfeeds.com, one of those polka dot deals. You know, you got to have a polka dot in there. Total Feeds, polkadot.com. Yep, and read about it. And the testimonials are there. They even show some of our horses on there. We're very proud to be a partner with them on this, podcast. In the meantime, I want to say God bless each and every one of you. Thanks for letting me share a few memories from XM Satellite Radio, and we will see you again. Be blessed.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Kilroy's Outlaws and Legends Behind the Music. If you have any thoughts or questions about the content, email them. Kilroy Outlaws and Legends, all one word, at yahoo.com. That's Kilroy, no S, Outlaws and Legends, all one word, at yahoo.com. And don't forget to subscribe. Third-party use of any part of this podcast without the expressed consent of Eddie Kilroy is prohibited. The Kilroy's Outlaws and Legends Behind the Music podcast is a production of Eddie Kilroy.